infrastructure bank, a green bank concept. Really kind of depends on where you are regionally, but in general, we are going to focus here on the Colorado's program, which is new, and their experience, and see what we can learn here in Missouri. I think that Paul's going to talk a little bit about how the origin stories for Missouri and Colorado kind of started in the same place, but then we kind of diverged and went different paths. So our speaker today is Paul Scharfenberger. He's the executive director of the Colorado Clean Energy Fund, Colorado's recently incorporated nonprofit green bank. Paul's responsible for identifying unserved and underserved clean energy opportunities in Colorado and working with a variety of stakeholders to structure creative and attractive financing solutions to bring those opportunities to fruition. Paul, thank you so much for participating in today. I look forward to hearing from you and having a discussion. And with that, I will hand it off to you.
Thanks so much, Josh. It's great to be here with you all today. As Josh mentioned, I'm the executive director of Colorado's state-sponsored nonprofit green bank. I'd like to just walk us all through kind of our history, how we came to be, describe some of the financing challenges that we're specifically focused on addressing, and then also share some lessons learned. I know we're a little bit short on time here, so I'll move fairly quickly. Want to make sure that we have plenty of time for a robust Q&A. So next slide, please. So the Colorado Clean Energy Fund was born from a multi-year partnership aimed at filling Colorado's clean energy finance gaps. And we'll get into what those gaps are. But this effort dated back to 2017. As Josh alluded to, we actually, the Colorado Energy Office applied for a competitive grant from the Department of Energy in partnership with the state of Missouri. So this was actually a partnership between the two states. This also involved the Coalition for Green Capital, which is a national nonprofit, which has essentially had its hand in incubating almost all of the green banks across the state, of which I believe there are approximately 15 now across the country. And really the effort was focused on trying to identify what are market barriers that create clean energy finance gaps, and what is the best way to fill those gaps. Around 2018, the effort concluded on our end, and there was a recommendation to essentially create a nonprofit mission-based investment fund that is focused specifically on fixing these clean energy finance challenges. And then it was actually December 2018, Governor Hickenlooper announced the incorporation of the Colorado Clean Energy Fund to act as Colorado's green bank. I joined the entity in September 2019 and really have focused since on the four following priorities. One is securing our operating funding, which we did from a large national foundation, provided 3 years of operating runway for us to really get our start, establish our governance structures, so get our board of directors in place, our articles of incorporation, all of that good stuff, develop our business plan, including our inaugural loan products, and then most importantly, raise our investment capital to actually launch our operations in earnest. Next slide, please. And so who are we? What is a green bank and what do we do? There are 4 main points that I'd like you to take away from this slide. First of all, we are a clean energy finance business whose mission is to use financial tools. What this means is we don't provide grants, rebates, incentives. We merely provide financial products. Now, I will say when we work with our borrowers, we also provide assistance to them to identify available grants, rebates, incentives in the market. The name of the game is to buy down the cost of financing as much as possible, but our entity focuses specifically on those financial tools. Secondly, we bring together commercial, public, and mission-driven capital to drive clean energy investment. Really what we need to do, the technological costs of clean energy technologies have come down dramatically. We need to start lowering the cost of capital. That's the other lever we can pull to improve the paybacks and make these projects even more attractive than they already are. And the way we do that is by blending different sources of capital. Our first major infusion of capital, which I'll get to in a second here, was from the state government. has a zero cost of capital as a grant. Well, we can now leverage that capital and raise some mission-driven capital from foundations, call it program-related investments, which are typically low-interest loans that we would take. And then we can blend that with market rate commercial capital and still enter the market with a very attractively priced product. Third, we break down market barriers and fill finance gaps and connect projects with capital. What this really means is we're not interested in competing with already existing finance efforts. We're trying to find the types of projects that have a hard time accessing capital and put our capital to work creatively to address those challenges. And then lastly, we use methods to catalyze greater overall investment. We'll talk about in a second. Again, we were capitalized with $30 million, which is a great start, but traditional commercial lenders have billions of dollars of assets under management. And in many cases, that capital is sitting on the sidelines. We need to unlock that. We need to invite these partners to begin investing in clean energy. And so we try to use our capital in a way that does exactly that. Partners with them, brings them into this industry, and unlocks the vast amounts of capital that are currently sitting on the sidelines. Next slide, please. So I keep talking about finance gaps. The effort that we endeavored in with Coalition for Green Capital and Department of Energy was multifaceted. And one of the portions of that effort was really to do a landscape analysis to figure out what clean energy products are currently available in our market, where are those gaps, what are the product recommendations, and then how should we structure those products to effectively fill those gaps. So the subsequent slides that I'm about to go into were essentially informed by this effort that we went through with the Department of Energy and Coalition for Green Capital back in 2017 and 2018. Next slide, please. What we found through that effort was that this list essentially outlines the gaps that we found. Small project financing is particularly challenging. It presents unattractive return profiles for lenders, and the underwriting costs associated with these projects can be high. And so what we often find is small projects are often underserved. This can be generation projects, call it a 1 to 10 megawatt community solar facility, but it can also just be small projects in the built environment. We find in Colorado, we have a lot of small commercial buildings, particularly in rural Colorado. Well, those small buildings are going to have small projects of energy efficiency, solar projects. A lot of times they're only going to be $100,000 or $200,000. And it's a little bit counterintuitive, but it's a lot easier to secure $50 million of funding for a large generation project than it is to secure $100,000 for a small rural energy efficiency product. So this is one of our major gaps. Similarly, rural project financing, again, it's counterintuitive, but a lot of lenders want to have a footprint in the area that they lend to. So as you get into the far corners of our state, if a lender doesn't have actual brick and mortar there or boots on the ground there, they typically don't lend in those areas. And so that is a huge challenge, particularly for a very large state like ours. Long tenor financing is a gap. We pay very low electricity rates in Colorado. And because of that, some technologies like solar can have a payback of 10 years or more. Well, most commercial loans particularly, and residential loans, typically cap out at about 5 to 7 years, maybe 10 years if you can find a very generous lender. But many cases we need 15-year financing, 20-year financing, and that's very hard to come by. And then medium credit quality financing. You'll find with small businesses, a lot of them have thin balance sheets. Similarly, in the residential sector, you have low and moderate income households, some of which have poor credit or poor debt to income ratios. And so anytime you run into this medium credit quality, you have a hard time accessing capital. Next slide, please. And so these are some of the tools that we use to address those issues. So if there's perceived project risk, say a household has poor credit and another lender doesn't want to provide the loan because they think it's too risky. Well, we can approach that lender and say, what if we offer a credit enhancement, like a loan loss reserve? We share in that risk. Will you make that loan? We find this is actually an incredibly effective tool for getting local banks and credit unions to provide clean energy loans when there is a perceived project risk. Inefficiencies of scale. I mentioned small projects are really hard to finance. Well, what about aggregation and warehousing? This is one of the tools that we utilize specifically, where we've essentially said, we'll go out and finance all these small projects. We'll bundle them into portfolios. And then when that portfolio achieves a scale that is attractive to you, called $1 million, $2 million, maybe even $5 million, then we sell those portfolios to these traditional commercial lenders. They love sitting on a diversified portfolio as opposed to just one large project. And we recapitalize our balance sheet so we can do it again and again and again. So this just gives you a feel for the types of tools that we use to leverage our capital to unlock some of the capital that's sitting on the sidelines with our commercial lenders like banks, credit unions, private equity, etc. Next slide, please. And so just to give an idea as to our initial focus here in Colorado, we are tackling two of the largest finance gaps that we see across the state. One focusing small commercial buildings. Again, these are small projects, many cases thin balance sheets for these small commercial building owners. And we are deploying two different loan products to fill this gap. And then secondly, low and moderate income households in the state. This is a challenge across the country. Traditional lenders typically do not lend to this portion of our population. And as we found in Colorado, we're never going to meet our climate goals by investing in a subset of our population. We need to provide access to capital to this portion of our population. And there's many different ways that we can do that effectively. Next slide, please. So on the commercial building side, we're deploying, as I mentioned before, two loan products. We have a robust commercial PACE program, just like Missouri. Our program has done about 100 deals, in aggregate about $155 million. But inherent in that statement is the average size project is over $1 million. And what that means is the CPACE program is not serving our small buildings and projects effectively. And so what we're doing in CPACE, we are focused specifically on small projects, less than $500,000, and will go as low as $50,000. We're providing 25-year financing, not to exceed 4.99%. And we operate within the confines of the CPACE program, and that's what dictates the time to close, the security, which is a senior tax lien. We've executed agreements with multiple banks and credit unions and private equity players who have agreed to purchase CPACE loans off of our balance sheet. So this is one of those warehousing products where we fix this gap by essentially being an intermediary in the market, and then we invite participation from private lenders by selling them our portfolios. We saw this done in the Minnesota PACE program, where they started with a $15 million fund. They have since revolved it 10 times and done $150 million of lending to small projects. So this isn't theory, this is actually working in practice. That said, CPACE doesn't work for everybody. You need to get mortgage holder consent. Ours is a statewide program, but some counties aren't participating. And so we have a CPACE alternative that is a subordinate lien product, a quicker time to close, 30 days, similar rate, 15-year term, and again, focus on small projects. So we feel with these two products, we'll really fill the finance gaps that are facing small and medium businesses across the state. Affordable housing is also a challenge here. We need to get more developers with clean energy and energy efficiency on their mind as they approach affordable housing developments. And so we've structured a suite of different affordable housing loan products, everything from pre-development loans to construction loans to post-construction debt. And these are, as you can see, amounts $1 million or less, 15-year terms, and a rate not to exceed 2.5%. So really attractive financing. Next slide, please. And next up, we're tackling the gaps that I mentioned in the residential sector, specifically for low and moderate income households. We do already have a statewide residential energy efficiency loan program called the Renew Loan Program. It's in partnership with various credit unions, but the challenge is they focus heavily on FICO and debt to income as their underwriting criteria. We are going to participate in that program, but we're going to have a far more inclusive underwriting criteria that goes beyond just those two metrics to determine who is bankable and who isn't. And so that's our whole home loan product for low and moderate income households. It'll be a long-term loan product up to 15 years, still attractive rates. And we feel like we'll really do a lot to fill the gaps, focus on low and moderate income households. That product, though, takes a few days to approve. And so we also recognize there's a need for an emergency replacement loan product. When somebody's hot water heater goes out, they can't wait a few days. We also don't want them buying a terribly inefficient gas unit and potentially putting it on their credit card, because once you miss a payment, you're facing insanely high rates. And so we're also developing a same-day approval, very low interest rate, emergency replacement loan product. And then lastly, I personally feel that tariff-based on-bill repayment programs in partnership with utilities is the most effective way of reaching low-income households. It's not considered debt in the eyes of the IRS, so you're not further financially compromising already financially compromised households. It's transferable if the property is for sale. So this is a far more nuanced and deep topic that we don't have time to go into today, but I would encourage folks to look into the topic of tariff-based on-bill and how it can be really effective for reaching low-income households. And I'm happy to connect with folks offline to discuss the ins and outs of that type of program. We have a fragmented utility system here. We have over 50 utilities. And so there's a vast network of potential partners to deploy this type of program. And we're really interested in doing that. So we're offering utilities here low interest capital and free technical assistance to develop and support these programs. And we feel that with the existing statewide program that I mentioned before, these will essentially fill the residential building gaps across the state. And then our next area of focus is on the transportation sector, specifically supporting fleet conversions to electric vehicles. That's really the next market that we're focused on once we've essentially addressed these finance gaps facing the built environment. Next slide, please. Now I'll move quickly because I know we're low on time here. So just some lessons learned. Sequencing is important. We actually started trying to raise capital before we had developed our loan products, and we quickly came to find that people want to know exactly how you're going to use their money. So we had to shift gears a bit and essentially go through the business planning process and know exactly what markets we were going to address, and specifically what products we were going to use and how we were going to use different investors' money that we are approaching. So sequencing really is important. It's important also to keep an eye towards, once you do launch a product, who are the outsourced vendors that you need to work with? This takes really a village to launch these type of products. An eye towards future product development and staffing has been key. You really need to capitalize on successes, and we need to grow this thing pretty quickly. Pro bono counsel we were fortunate to have, and it's come in handy. There's a lot of legal issues you need to encounter when developing this type of lending institution. And then our connection to the state government has proven to be extremely valuable. In fact, once the state invested in us, it has made our fundraising efforts far easier. And I'm happy to answer questions on that, but I will say the connection to the state government has been extremely helpful. And then our priorities ahead are really just raising additional capital. As I said, 30 million is great, but we need to be investing billions of dollars towards these gaps. And so we continue to raise capital in hopes of growing our fund dramatically. We're growing our internal operational apparatus for the future, really investing in technology to scale our products, staffing up, growing our team. It's important to capitalize on early successes with a media push, and that's really what we're looking to do. We closed our first loan actually yesterday, and we have many others following up soon thereafter. So developing our communication strategy, and then just strengthening our origination channels, because the name of the game is pipeline, pipeline, pipeline. We need to be funding a lot of projects, and so we need to strengthen those strategic partnerships with folks across the state, so that we are getting the word out and getting connected to as many projects as possible. And then lastly, just refining our lending process to support scale. Again, this all has to be scalable. Lending $30 million isn't going to get the job done. We need to really scale this into a much larger machine. And I believe that's my last slide, although here's my contact information. As I said before, I'd be happy to connect with folks after the session. I know this is a lot to cover in a short amount of time, so please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Paul, thank you very much. And all you should know, unless things have changed, it's right now, I think it's Paul with potentially one or two other people helping you out, right, to do all this?
We had our first staff member join on December 1st. So it's 2 of us now, which is very nice. And we actually have our 3rd coming on in January. And I expect to get up to about 5 to 7 people, probably by the end of Q2 next year. So we're really excited for 2022.
Well, that sounds fantastic. You should be commended for all your hard work. As many of you know, as Paul knows, as the administrator for Show Me Pace, all the problems that you expressed for trying to find funding for those projects that are in the gaps, we too have seen, and it's been very difficult. Really excited and energized by what you've been able to do there, and address those issues of small projects, rural projects. So you deserve significant kudos there. I imagine you're getting it, but you can get it from across the state here as well.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We did have one question, and I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure I let Dana's point come across. She had mentioned a partnership that you had with Missouri. Can you clarify that partnership was just that it was in the research and the development of such a fund, but nothing existing currently, correct?
That's correct. We applied in partnership with Missouri, but it was a unique application. This again was for the Department of Energy competitive grant. Missouri had expressed interest in looking into a green bank, as did Colorado. And so we jointly applied, and we got 2 different pots of money. And that's kind of where the effort separated. Missouri went off with their own investigation. We went off in our own investigation, and compared notes along the way. But unfortunately, at the end of that effort, I kind of lost touch with Missouri's progress and where they had taken it. So you probably know more than I do, but we were essentially on similar pathways investigating the option of a green bank in each of our respective states.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I don't think Missouri got past the investigation part. Our problem was the identifying where the money would go to create a pipeline that would work fast enough for private lenders if it was purely private, and then also just not having the ability to get state dollars in. I know you had mentioned looking at Minnesota and their program. They were able to use our dollars to launch that first revolving loan, which was good. You got allocation from the state. Does Colorado have a tradition of making these type of investments? Are you like a first domino to fall? How does it look from your perspective?
There wasn't much precedent for this, I will say. This was a large grant provided by the state. So we received $30 million this last legislative session. It was really focused on economic stimulus coming out of, although we're still in it, but looking towards the end of COVID. And so our Governor Polis had created this package of stimulus bills. We were included in there, recognizing the job creation potential and the fact that our loans are really reducing operating costs for small businesses and households that are hurting right now. So we were fortunate. There isn't much precedent for as large a grant as we received. And so we feel very fortunate. But I think the state really had a strong understanding of what we were pitching, which is it is hard to find the ability to leverage public capital in the way that green banks across the country have demonstrated an ability to do. I mean, we see across the nation, green banks are leveraging capital at a 4-to-1 ratio. So every public dollar that's put in, they're leveraging $4 of private capital. And we see some of the green banks leveraging capital above a 10-to-1 ratio. So it's just an extremely efficient way to use public capital to mobilize far greater private investment. And just a quick note on that Minnesota PACE program, It was the St. Paul Port Authority. You're exactly right, Josh. They used ARA money, $15 million, which is a large investment, but it's still a modest amount of capital. And I think what that demonstrated for us here locally is that you can have a huge impact with a relatively modest amount of capital if you are leveraging it effectively, because they've essentially now done $150 million of loans with that original 15. So we have been communicating that up to our leaders here at the state, and I think they really understood the potential, and we're fortunate they did. And now it's our mission to make sure that we go have the same success as other green banks across the country.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. The other interesting thing about Minnesota, right, is that similar to what your story is, that $15 million then leveraged their relationship with a local bank, credit union up there, that then added an additional $10 million in revolving loan, similar to what you're working at doing. So it really emphasizes your point that just any amount of seed money and commitment from the state really does leverage private capital here and demonstrate the opportunity to develop a public-private partnership. Interesting to note for those on the call, another question regarding, sorry, this is less to you, Paul, but who's leading the effort in Missouri on this energy fund? And, the Division of Energy obviously is taking the lead role. There are others. I know we are one that has been working with a variety of different partners to figure out what we can do to get this done here. But for those on the call here, the audience, Missouri, some of the things that Paul talked about, right? Missouri does have a CPACE program. We have not seen a lot of projects funded under $100,000 on the commercial side. There are a few, but the lending problem that Paul mentioned is one that we experience. Rural Missouri is definitely left out on a lot of these projects, a lot of opportunities for the private funding part. And when we look at the other option you had mentioned, the residential program, both, I believe, Ameren and Evergy are developing a PAYS program, which is a non-bail financing. And so there may be an opportunity there to see that grow and develop. There is also, I did have a question for you, Paul, and that was when you talked about your low-income residential program, you talked about limiting purchase of a gas furnace. Do you not allow purchase of gas?
No, we do. We just want to make sure that it's as efficient as possible. And so recognizing that we're kind of providing a benefit of extremely low interest rate financing, we're looking at providing 2% or less to really, again, motivate people away from putting on their credit card and use our tool. To get that benefit, we just want to make sure that it is as efficient a gas furnace as possible. We do really want to support electrification. And so I could see some tiered incentives for electric hot water heaters, but recognizing that gas water heaters in many cases are a necessity for folks that need to upgrade their entire infrastructure to support electrification. We do allow for the financing of gas furnaces or water heaters.
Okay, good. I just didn't know with the climate angle that you had, if that was an issue, but you're just trying to make sure that we have the same thing with our residential program, that we try and make sure is that it's not just the cheapest replacement, but that it is a unit that provides as much, whether it's a gas furnace or an electric HVAC or whatever it may be. Can you tell us what you think the hardest, the biggest hurdle you had to face to get to where you are today? What would that be?
The investment capital. It really, I mean, the investment from the state has changed everything. Now, would this be achievable without it? I still think yes, but it would have taken much longer. What I mean by that is there are a lot of foundations, both locally and nationally, that are committing more and more capital in this area. But the runway to land that capital can be long. Now that the state has invested in us, even if the investment had been far less, I think it would have allowed us to at least speed up the conversations with foundations. What I mean by that is I now have foundations reaching out to us because they've heard of the partnership with the state, the investment from the state. So it's just really made those conversations quite a bit easier. And I think we're going to grow our fund much quicker, have a lot more fast success, which allows us obviously to expedite kind of our growth trajectory. Without the investment from the state, I think it would have taken us a long time to get where we are right now.
All right, yeah, that's unfortunately for the last several years, that's kind of what we've been running into as well. We just haven't found the avenue just due to the return rate that the private industry wants on those, whereas state dollars they don't require it as much.
And that's a great point. I mean, really the challenges that we're trying to address, like 10% money doesn't work. You need to have mission kind of focused concessionary capital. And there's only a few actors that can provide that. It's typically government and philanthropy.
Right. Do you find any of your clients are going to be local governments, or is it just private sector?
No, we're really excited about the opportunity to work with local governments because similarly, a lot of our small municipalities, they can't float bonds. They can't, raise capital the way that larger cities can. And so we're working actually with quite a few small municipalities, small school districts to figure out how we can structure loan products to support their clean energy projects as well.
Okay, that was going to be my next part, because what we found is, there's a need in that area for those smaller communities, but the interest rate has to be so low that your traditional, like your 4.9 is still too high. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should note too, those rates were not to exceed 4.99 for really quality borrowers. I'll say that we're actually mostly around the 4% range. And then for municipal actors, we will be quite a bit lower than that.
Well, that is great. I hope I speak for many on this session, on the audience, that we will be watching with excitement and bated breath to see your continued growth and dissecting every step that you take, no pressure, to figure out how we can follow in your footsteps and help address some of the gaps that we have in Missouri in a most effective way to help folks implement more efficiency within their properties. So Paul, thank you so much for your time today. I greatly appreciate it. All your hard work and your openness to talk about this. I know that we've connected you with a number of people in Missouri to share your story outside of here today. So really do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah,